I'm aiming for peacefulness and calm. You know, there was an investor, James Altucher, who talks a lot about how he doesn't seek happiness, he seeks this calmness. And the reason why he says that is because happiness depends on something. I'm happy that I have ice cream. I'm happy that it's sunny out, right? But it's always dependent. So if I don't have ice cream or if it's raining out, well, then I'll be sad. And he was never really comfortable with that. And that resonates with me. I like the idea that I can be in my own self-contained little cube, that I'll be fine without a lot of sort of dependencies. And a lot of that is just trying to pick out, you know, what's bothering me and can I get rid of that?
That was Charlie O'Donnell, sole partner and founder of Brooklyn-bred Ventures. I'm Lucy Norris, and this is Views from the Top. Today I spoke with Charlie all about the New York ecosystem, his role as an investor, and how he is open, willing, and accessible to founders when looking for the next opportunity. Charlie, you are the founder and sole partner of Brooklyn-bred Ventures, and this whole fund will invest in pre-seed and seed companies here in Brooklyn. Why was it important to you to start a company here in Brooklyn, where you were born and raised, and only invest in companies in New York City?
So there's the opportunity factor and the convenience factor. So I live in Brooklyn, and if I was going to start a firm on my own, the idea of putting the office a little closer to my house made a lot of sense and not have to do a commute. But actually, to be honest, most of the creative startup founders, like a fair amount of them, live in Brooklyn. And so they're making that same kind of decision, whereas maybe when they were in their 20s, it was fun to be in the city and, you know, do that commute. But as they think about partnering up and starting families and all that sort of stuff, then they're making a big residential move to Brooklyn. And if they're going to start a company, why commute into Manhattan when, you know, your first developer and your first designer are living down the street from you? So there's a fair amount of startups in Brooklyn, and it was an easy commute, and nothing's really that far away from each other, especially when you're on a bike like I am all day.
Which you are a lot of the time.
Yes.
You're very healthy.
I biked here.
Did you really?
I did.
You didn't bring the bike into the studio.
It's locked up outside.
Okay, good. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll send someone down there to make sure it's still there when you come out. Now, tell us a little bit about the companies that you invest in. What sort of areas do they work in? Sure.
It's a pretty wide swath of companies. So the really cool thing about the New York ecosystem is that, you know, we're not a one industry town. So in as much as people think of New York as sort of maybe a finance place, there's also media and food and entertainment, and you name the industry, it's basically here. And so I've got everything from companies that are doing kids apps to kids playgroups in parks to brick and mortar ice cream shops to organic food processing companies, and so it's, you know, all over the board, in addition to your typical sort of business software and that kind of thing. Charlie is known for being able to spot the successful early-stage startups, but is also very confident that social impact should not be a trade-off anymore, and that it should be built into the model as the companies grow. Now, you've been described as an investor who is able to spot those early important companies before others are starting to invest in them. So what is it that you look for? I mean, you just mentioned there are a variety of different companies, but there must be some strategic plan that you have when you're choosing these companies that you want in your portfolio. I think a lot of life in general is being open to something. And so being open and willing and accessible to talk to founders at an early stage, I think, is the first step, right? So it's not the magic of being able to pick one versus the other, but raising your hand and saying, hey, if you have a napkin, a PowerPoint, half a prototype, 2 pieces of duct tape, whatever thing you're at, whatever stage you're at, I'm willing to have a conversation. And sometimes that conversation's an in-person meeting. Sometimes it's just an email and being able to get a response back and getting direct feedback and saying, hey, here's what I don't like about this model. Here's what I do like about this model. Come back when you've got these problems solved. You know, sometimes that's really all it takes to be first in terms of spotting an opportunity. Well, I would imagine that it's hard, though, when
an entrepreneur is pitching to you and there isn't a final product. It's just an idea. And I know that one of those companies was Tiny Bop. It was just an idea. So what was it about that company that made you see beyond just this thing that they had created in their head?
I think one of the important thing is a fit between the skills of the founder and the challenges of the company. So in the case of a company like Tiny Bop, which is building these really incredibly well-crafted kids apps for iOS and mobile devices in general, Raul, who's the founder, first of all, he's a dad. And he's a great dad of two wonderful kids. And he grew up in a time where kids would get these really well-illustrated children's encyclopedias or, these books about biology or all this sort of stuff with these like very artistic, very creative illustrations. And he looked at the technology that his kids were using, saying, well, why isn't anything on that level? Why doesn't anything have that high level of craft and inspiration and creativity to it? And so he just had this insight into the opportunity for something like that. And moreover, he had a network. He was in a network of incredibly creative designers. And so I was able to get confidence to say, oh, I know Raul knows who the good designers are.
Right.
I know he knows how to work with them. Whereas if two hedge fund, employees came in and said, hey, our kids like mobile devices, we're gonna go get something designed well, I'm not sure that the top designers would want to work for, a couple of finance bros or,
right.
They would even know who the top designers were. So the challenge there is really the talent and knowing how to find and manage the talent. And that's something that I was confident that entrepreneur knew how to do.
Charlie's interest in the companies that he invests in is definitely varied, but one common thread is his passion to fund startups that are truly making a difference. It seems as though more and more consumers now are wanting to align themselves with businesses that do well, do good. They want to know the story. Like they want to know that story about Raul and that he is a dad and that he has good intentions with the company. Is that something that you look for when investing in companies? Do you look for more of those stories, those brands that are making an impact?
I don't think it's a trade-off anymore, really. I think the companies that have the best economic potential undoubtedly are the ones that are also doing the most good or have the potential to do the most good. And so if you look at a company like Industrial Organic, which I backed, they are processing organic food waste and turning it around in less than a week and doing it in a way that's urban friendly. You can do it in a warehouse, so there's not a big environmental impact on where it might move into in a neighborhood. There's no shortage of garbage, right? There's no shortage of food waste. It literally makes up 20% of landfills. So they have this huge economic opportunity. And obviously it's really good for the environment that we're not throwing the stuff away. So, a lot of times we think of impact funds as, either looking for less return or making trade-offs. And I'm not an impact fund. I just think that some of the best economic opportunities that I've found are the ones that are also making the most impact.
Tell me a little bit about the other company that you have backed, which encourages children and families to learn more outside, but is also helping teachers from a job point of view as well.
Sure, that's Tinkergarten. And Tinkergarten is a distributed network of kids' classes in parks. And so, we went from talking about apps, which kids spend a fair amount of time on, but you want to balance their education and their interaction, right? And getting them outdoors. Outdoors is really the best classroom. I mean, studies have shown that kids are calmer when they're outdoors. They are stimulated by all the things that are going on in their environment. Obviously, physical activity is beneficial at a young age and getting that out there. And so what Tinkergarten does is they have this really fantastic platform with all of this content, and they hire these leaders and train and vet a whole army of leaders to go off in all these distributed places and run these classes. So everywhere from the Upper West Side to the suburbs of Dallas to Maine to California. They're in 40 some odd states right now. They'll have 1,000 leaders by the end of the year. And the curriculum is sort of a little bit of a cross between play and learning. One thing I learned, a lot of parents, they'll see their 1 or 2 year olds spinning until they fall down, and their natural instinct as a parent is stop spinning, right? It turns out that's actually the way kids sort of train their inner ear around balance. And so the more your kids spin and fall down, the more they will become balanced. So you should actually let them spin. That's something I really didn't know that much about. They've sort of integrated that into their play, and it's part of a pedagogy. It's part of the learning experience of Tinkergarten.
Do you think that that's an approach as an investor that you tend to have with your entrepreneurs? You let them spin a little bit so that they can find their own balance?
Sometimes they spin a little out of control. I'm investing at a stage where, realistically, half of the companies are not going to make it.
Right.
But one thing that I had to learn as an investor, and even though I've been in the asset class now for 16 years, I still feel like I'm relatively new at it, and running my own fund now for only about 5. And one of the learnings I've had to do is realize it's their company, right? You are not there to tell them what to do. You're there to ask the right questions. You're there to provide support. But ultimately, you have to let the founder run the business. And frankly, they know more than you about that space. You're not the expert. You're vetting the expert to make sure that they have enough information, they have the right support, and they're watching their blind spots as well.
You have a column called This Is Going to Be Big. And in a recent article, you wrote about how there is always money available. What do you mean by that, and how should an entrepreneur take that and use that advice and run with it?
Sure. So, there's been a lot of news in the tech community about investors with, less than ideal ethical standards and morals. And some founders have gone through some really difficult experiences fundraising, particularly at the early stage. And what I feel bad about in those situations is, I was a founder too. I not only founded my firm, but also worked on a startup and felt like this is the only investor who's going to back us, right? We're so close on this person,
right,
and we've tried everyone else, that it's very tempting to let stuff go, right? To say, well, maybe I don't really like this person, but, they're so close to writing a check. Well, that can be a slippery slope. I don't like this person, to I don't like how they treat me specifically, to, I'm now uncomfortable in a situation or feel unsafe. And you want to do what's right by your employees. You want to do what's right by your investors. And I think a lot of founders have made unfortunate trade-offs in situations where they might not have had to, where they felt like they had to. But my message was basically to say, hey, listen, if you can't find someone who respects you, who is professional, just move on from that person. Because I can't imagine a situation where there is literally only one investor on the face of the earth who is going to fund your company, and they're a jerk. Right? And so 9 times out of 10, that person was probably not going to come through anyway.
Well, then that brings me to ask you, when do you know when it's time to move on from a company? When do you know when it's done, it's not right to continue funding this, it's not working for you as an investor?
Well, unfortunately, I'm stuck in the company, right? There are definitely moments where you're like, I don't think this is working, but as long as they have cash in the bank, they will continue. And I think as a solo general partner, sometimes I have to make, trade-offs in terms of my time. But I don't run a large fund, so I don't actually have the capacity to keep funding something over and over and over again until maybe we eventually get it right. And I think that's actually in the best interest of the founders. Because as a founder, you don't want to get stuck in a company that isn't working for 5 or 6 years in your career.
Right.
It's better to fail fast and say, you know what, we tried, we put in a lot of effort, it didn't work, let's go move on to something else. And there have definitely been founders who have lost money with me, and I've said, I'd be more than happy to back you for the next company. Let's just make sure it doesn't have a lot of the same characteristics, but the founders were terrific either way.
Charlie opened up about some of the mistakes that he made in the early part of his career and how he now approaches investing differently, knowing what he knows now. What has been one of the biggest mistakes that you've made in your own career?
I think early on, I had a lot of access to high net worth individuals and people with capital. So I used to be at the General Motors pension fund. So we used to fund funds. No one ever thinks of VCs as having to fundraise,
right.
But we have to get money from investors as well. And so we're reaching out to endowments and pension funds and all that sort of stuff. So we had connections with partners at Blackstone and partners at Apollo and all of these like big buyout firms, but I didn't want to do their job. I was much more interested in tech and startups or whatever. Well, I've come to realize that a lot of those people actually are some of the early angels in some of those startup companies. You might see a partner at a private equity fund, buy manufacturing companies for a living, but actually get most excited by putting a little money into a startup company. And so when I went out to fundraise for my fund, I realized, wow, I actually knew a lot of these people who wanted access to what I had. And actually that was sort of the mistake, is not realizing that I had something interesting. I had value. I thought I was asking for money, but I was actually providing an opportunity to help an entrepreneur or to be a part of the next big app or what have you. And I regretted not keeping those contacts and keeping them fresh because, down the line, I could have helped them maybe spot that next big company.
Right. Now, I know that you do, alongside your work, you do a ton of races and you're constantly staying healthy, keeping fit, riding your bike to a shoot like this. You seem to have a competitive nature by taking part in these races. Do you think that that lends itself to your work as an investor and how you invest? Does it affect your mindset at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I sort of Instagram competitive, perhaps, where it seems like maybe I'm a lot more competitive than I am. I'm very measured in terms of like where I allocate my time, right? So I'm willing to train a certain amount, but I also want to go see my family and I want to have a certain relationship with my startup founders, right? So I'm not so into it that if a founder calls me up and says, hey, I have this problem to work out, I can't say, oh, today is, extra long run day and I can't talk to you about it, right? So there's other priorities that I have. The racing is more of a sort of self-challenge, can I do better than last time and where can I improve? And as an investor, I'm always sort of thinking about that, right? Like, how do I make a better decision for next time? Or, this founder needed help in a way that I didn't see early on. What question would I have asked on the outside? And so I think that continuous improvement is really where the racing kind of fits in.
How do you measure your own success?
I think it's just sort of happiness is a good measure, or more specific to me, I think I'm aiming for peacefulness and calm. There was an investor, James Altucher, who talks a lot about how he doesn't seek happiness, he seeks this calmness. And the reason why he says that is because happiness depends on something. I'm happy that I have ice cream. I'm happy that it's sunny out, right? But it's always dependent. So if I don't have ice cream or if it's raining out, well, then I'll be sad. And he was never really comfortable with that. And that resonates with me. I like the idea that I can be in my own self-contained little cube, that I'll be fine without a lot of sort of dependencies. And a lot of that is just trying to pick out, what's bothering me and can I get rid of that, right? So it's also why I'm a solo partner at a fund, is because for as much as I've worked at some really great funds, the 5-hour partner meeting once a week was just not
doing it for
not really doing it for me. Great people around the table, but I wanted to go out and sort of spend more time with entrepreneurs. So,
well, I'm really happy that we got you here specifically for this next question that I'm going to ask you, because you know, earlier on I mentioned that you have been described as this investor who's able to spot these early important companies before anyone else is really getting onto those companies. Which businesses do you think that we need to keep an eye out for right now? You don't necessarily have to say names, or just trends that are
Because I was going to name my whole portfolio.
Oh, well,
actually.
you could go ahead and name those as well. But what businesses do you think that we should be looking out for?
Well,
that are making an impact as well?
Sure. You know, it's interesting because most of venture capital is tech, and historically has been mostly tech businesses. But I think you're seeing a lot of businesses in different areas and different industries get disrupted in a way that isn't just about ones and zeros. And, you know, you can only get so much more efficient on technology, but what a lot of people are optimizing for is experience. They're optimizing for different levels of wellness or self-actualization or what have you. So I'll bring up two brick and mortar businesses, actually. One is a women's professional networking space called The Wing.
I was going to say, is it called The Wing?
Yes, it is called The Wing.
I saw that in the portfolio. So before, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but
sure.
before I saw that in your portfolio, I was a fan of what they were doing, and then I saw that they were part of...
Everyone's a huge fan of what they're doing.
So what made you want to invest in them?
So it is kind of interesting to be an investor in a company you can't visit. But that's the way it works. I mean, first of all, Audrey and Lauren are absolutely terrific founders and terrific operators.
Nice.
I mean, I occasionally will send over a question by email and say, do you need any help with anything? Because literally their execution has been flawless. They, you know, built a physical space in New York City on time, on budget. They have 3 more spaces opening. And so, and a very, very long list of potential new members. And I think what really hit home to me as to why that space was important was a friend of mine was there on election night, and election night didn't wind up the way a lot of people in New York City were looking for it to go. And she said, you know, it was a really disappointing night for me, but I couldn't imagine being anywhere else than in the company of other women. And so it just, you know, it doubled down for me and really brought home how important it is to feel like you're in a space of shared values and shared experiences and all that sort of stuff. And that's something that, you know, women in the professional world don't have enough of, and they've shown it through their results. The other company is a deal I'm working on now called the Financial Gym. And they are a physical space for financial wellness. They are basically a way to get financially fit.
I love that.
Their whole theme is sort of gym-like or Weight Watchers-like, where you have a trainer, you check in, you have access to this person, but it's a person. It's not an app. It's a person who understands that you bought something on impulse, or, you know, is not going to judge you for your Uber or Lyft habit. And
why do you say that to me?
just one's Uber or Lyft habit. And so, you know, they have customers that have come in and said, you know, there was a couple who came in and said, you know, if it wasn't for the Financial Gym, we'd be divorced because of the money struggles and arguments and issues that they were having. And just something so simple as being able to sit down with somebody and work out a plan. And I think what's most interesting about some of these deals is, you know, in the example of the Financial Gym, their space is a means of customer acquisition. Customer acquisition is really, really hard. There's limited channels these days to find a mass audience, right? As anybody in the media space knows, right? Yeah. You heavily rely on sort of Facebooks and Googles and what have you, and it can get very expensive. When you have a physical space, you can host events every night. You can host events about saving for college, or, you know, how to pay down debt, or, you know, what is a mortgage, which like a lot of people never got taught. And they're converting a lot of the people who attend their events into regular monthly customers. And so they will have a brick and mortar retail rollout, and it's an exciting company to be a part of.
That's fantastic. I'm excited to hear more about them and how they're going to approach the next few months.
I'm going to sign up as a customer.
I will do. And I'm excited to see all of the future that holds when it comes to the companies in your portfolio, especially Ample Hills, which we didn't even get to, which is ice cream quickly in just like a few sentences. Tell me why this company is awesome.
It's literally the best ice cream shop on the face of the earth.
And are you going to send some drops the mic? I totally jumped on you dropping the mic then, I'm sorry.
I mean, it's in Disney World. I mean, how can you go wrong with that?
But they did start in Brooklyn, hence why you
started in Brooklyn.
invested in them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. How can people find out more about what you're up to? How can they follow you on social media? I know we spoke about it earlier. How can they keep up to date with you?
So I'm on Twitter at CEONYC, which is actually my initials. It's not a company thing. And I blog at This Is Going to Be Big, where there's also a link to a weekly newsletter that I put out about tech and events in the New York community.
Fantastic. And you guys can stay up to date with everything that we're doing by following us here at Karma Network and me, Lucy J. Norris, on Instagram and Twitter. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, cheers, but we won't drink this because it's probably cold by now. But thanks for joining us.
No problem.
To find out more about Charlie O'Donnell and Brooklyn-bred Ventures, here's how you do it. So that's all from us here today, but Tamara, who can we expect to see next week?
Next week, I sit down with Rachel Renock, and she talks to me about disproving misnomers and how she became the CEO of a tech company after being in the advertising business.
Very cool, very interesting.
It's a really great conversation.
I look forward to that one. Well, guys, I'll see you next time. I'm Lucy Norris.
I'm Tamara Lane.
And you've been watching Views from the Top.